Thank you for joining us. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News, and welcome to Post Talk Live. Good afternoon to most of you. Good evening to a couple of you, and good morning to the folks out on the West Coast. My name is Drew Armstrong. I'm the executive editor of Endpoints News and your host here on Post Talk Live. So, 2 decades ago, when I was a very baby-faced reporter on Capitol Hill, Texas Republican Michael Burgess was also a relatively new member of Congress. He'd been swept in with the post-Clinton wave of Bush conservatives. Burgess, physician, he was one of a number of doctors in Congress, and he quickly became a voice on Republican healthcare policy. He's been reelected 9 times. And since leaving Congress, he's watched the Maha takeover of GOP health and vaccine policy. He's been speaking out about maternal and infant health, about vaccine preventable diseases, autism, and other healthcare issues, and warning that Republicans are running a political risk by not sticking up for the science and the policy that many of them once believed in. Now, if you are joining us for the first time here on Post Talk Live, hello. We bring you the reporting, the analysis, and the debate that usually happens behind the scenes in our newsroom live to you. If you're joining us on YouTube and you're not already following us, please hit that little subscribe button below our feed, get alerts about future live streams. You can also sign up for the Post Talk email on your Endpoints News subscription page. And if you are with us live, make sure you can join the conversation. We'll be screening for questions. Ask us in the YouTube chat, and one of our producers will take a look at us. Now, Dr. Burgess, welcome to Post Talk Live. Thank you for joining us. We also have Max Bayer here, our senior reporter, our man on Maha and all things vaccine. Dr. Burgess, I want to take you back in history a little bit. You were a practicing physician. You were in Texas. What made you decide that you wanted to be run for Congress and get involved in these issues, at this point, 2+ decades ago? What drove you into politics?
Well, for me, it was part of the post 9/11 emotional upheaval that a lot of us went through after the attacks on our country in September 2001. And yes, I was a practicing physician. I had been involved in direct patient care for 25 years. Arguably, I was the best in the area. But after 9/11, I began to seriously question if I was doing what I was supposed to be doing with my life. My son at the time was an enlisted man in the Air Force. He was serving his country. What was I doing? Sitting in an office writing prescriptions. So a lot of significant introspection. And then toward the end of that year, my member of Congress, who'd been in there for a long, long time, and just to correct you, I won re-election 11 times, not 9 times.
Excuse me.
I served for 22 years. My member of Congress then at that time, who'd been there for a long time, announced he was not running for re-election. And he kind of waited late in the filing period, which was December of that year, before he made his announcement. It was December 12th. Filing closed right after New Year's Day on January 3rd. So I had a very, very short period of time to sort of assess it. And it just came to mind that, hey, maybe this is something I should do. I Googled, how do you run for Congress? Turns out it wasn't all that difficult. You go to a couple of clicks and I was taken to the Secretary of State's website. You have a form to fill out. The questions were easy, like where do you live? How long have you lived there? What's your name? And then you write a very big check to the Republican Party, and next thing you know, you're on the ballot. Now, doing the actual work of running was extremely hard, and I was still running a full-time practice during those 2 or 3 months that occurred. And then in Texas at the time, and you still do, you've got to get 50% plus 1 to avoid a runoff. So we ended up in a runoff, which at that point was only 4 weeks long, very intense period of time. But at the end of that, on April 9th of that year of 2002, I won the runoff for the Republican nomination. And in this district, the Republican nomination is tantamount to winning the election. So I was fortunate, and I did have the entire summer to let my patients know that I was closing my practice. I'd actually I'd stopped taking OB patients of my own
Yeah.
a
You were
couple
an
of years
OBGYN, right?
before.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't that difficult a transition, but I did, under Texas law, you have to let your patients know 90 days before you close your practice. I had 5 partners who would obviously be there to take care of people who were currently in the practice. So it worked out. And then I got to tell you, I had a lot of people question me, say, what in the world, a doctor really didn't have any business running for Congress because you're not cut out to be a congressman. But as a doctor, you learn to be a good listener, and you can't be a good congressman if you're not a good listener. So there were some of the skills that I developed through my practice years turned out to be invaluable during my service in the United States House of Representatives.
What were, I mean, how would you describe Republican healthcare politics and policy at that time? I mean, what people really cared about, what the issues were? Because my recollection was we talked a lot about Medicare. There was some talk about drug pricing, but it hadn't fully blown up as an issue the way it has. But we certainly didn't talk much about vaccines. And, there wasn't really a lot, there was debate around, I think, a lot of, right to life issues and stem cells, but we weren't seeing these fundamental debates about science and evidence and vaccines and kind of what felt at the time like pretty harmonized positions around a lot of public health. Am I remembering that right?
Some remember 60 Minutes early in the 2000s before I came into office. 60 Minutes did a big thing about seniors going to Canada to buy your drugs
Yeah.
because the prices were so high on Medicare because there was no prescription drug coverage. So George Bush, to his credit, said, "This is something I'm going to tackle, and I'm going to get the Congress to get it done." And he did. In 2003, my first year, November, my first year, we passed the Medicare Modernization Act, which, if you'll recall, included Part D of Medicare. It also included Medicare Advantage, which expanded some of the services that are available in Medicare. Arguably, now there are some problems with Medicare Advantage that need to be addressed, but these were all things that were done by Republican Congress and a Republican administration. And if you look back historically, long before I got there, Orrin Hatch was the author of the first children's health insurance program, the state children's health insurance program that Congress funded in 1996. I had the honor of renewing that one time for 2 years and one time for 10 years, and we're still in that second 10-year renewal. So Congress will have to deal with that again. But these were all Republican programs that people sometimes say, well, Republicans don't care about health care, but I would argue that we do. We passed some big, well, going back a little bit further, in 1996, Newt Gingrich with the Kennedy-Kassebaum Act and unfortunately, the bill that gave us HIPAA and healthcare, we really didn't like that, but it also gave in that portability, it also allowed a demonstration for 750,000 health savings accounts to be created. And I rejoiced at that. I thought a health savings account, I mean, that's the correct incentive to have patients be involved in their healthcare and help control the cost in healthcare. And I was right about that. And it's been proven several times. Now in 2003, we also expanded HSAs and allowed some greater flexibility in health savings accounts. Well, I think at the time they were called MSAs, but nevertheless, that was a Republican initiative. So again, that when you and I'm sorry, I can't help myself. I was there when Obamacare happened. And did Obamacare deliver on any of the promises that it was supposed to? And the answer is absolutely not. And healthcare became much more expensive. And I would have people coming into my office in 2017 who would say, look, there's a mandate that I buy this health insurance. It's a federal law that I have to buy it. And it's so expensive that I simply can't afford it. And then the policy that I can possibly pay for has a deductible that's so high that if I go to the emergency room with a kidney stone in the middle of the night, I've got a bill that I can't handle because I'm spending all my disposable income on a premium to an insurance company. So the Affordable Care Act was, it could have been a, a much more reasonable bill, but for whatever reason, and I wrote a book about this at the time, for whatever reason, the Democrats just would not accept any Republican initiatives to be part of that. You're going to reform healthcare from soup to nuts, and the best thing you can do is expand Medicaid. And Medicaid is a program that the GAO says repeatedly is a risky program because of fraud. And now that Medicaid was doubled under President Obama, what have you got? Double the fraud. And this is something that I'm sorry, Congress is going to have to tackle, and it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be pretty. But at the
Mhm.
same time, you cannot shovel tens of billions of dollars into a fraudulent system and expect the American taxpayer to happily pay for it.
You you've been a little bit more recently writing a lot about, I think vaccine politics and I think from kind of public health and science perspective. When did you notice, you talk to constituents a lot, I'm sure you were in your district a ton. Was that something that started to change, the conversation around that started to change? What did you notice, kind of, was that a COVID thing? Was there something happening there before with people in your district? When did this kind of start to shift and you began to notice that something was going on here?
Well, I live in a part of the world and I represented a part of the world that where vaccine hesitancy has actually been part of the landscape for as long as I can remember. So this is not new. It did not happen with RFK Jr. It did not happen with COVID. It did not happen with Trump or Biden. But it's sort of been the backdrop of what I have seen for years. And okay, I get it. You have a child who has a serious problem, and you are looking for reasons why this happened. And somewhere in the late 1990s, there was a doctor in England who uh, published some studies in the Lancet who said it's pretty obvious it's vaccines that are causing this. Now that has been disproven over and over again. I don't know how many times you need to do that, but the notion really got embedded in the thinking of some people. Then you have COVID come along, and listen, does Trump deserve the Nobel Prize? Yes, for Operation Warp Speed. That was a fantastic achievement to think that within 9 months' time of the appearance of this novel coronavirus, you could actually have protection for it. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it wasn't everything that everyone said it was going to be. Maybe you did have to take boosters, and one shot did not cover all varieties of the coronavirus. But it was fantastic that Trump put uh, his emphasis on let's get this done. And so you found out that phase 2 and phase 3 trials can run concurrently after you get through the phase 1 trials and establish that there's no toxicity. Phase 2 and phase 3 can run concurrently. And then, most importantly, for a manufacturer to get all in on making the product, you have to guarantee the sale of it. And he did that. All of that occurred in the fall of the first Trump administration. And again, he's to be congratulated for that. In fact, there were some people who were so fearful that Trump would use that as a method of winning re-election in 2020 that they held up the approval at the FDA until a week after election day. Tell me that wasn't a political maneuver. And I think Bradley feels a little bit slighted by that. But then you had the Biden administration come in. And at first, of course, you had Kamala Harris saying, I'm not going to take a vaccine developed by the Trump administration. And the next thing you know, they're mandating it, a federal mandate to take a vaccine. You don't do federal mandates in vaccine world. It's just not the way things happen. Yes, they might happen at a state level. Yes, your school district might have a requirement, but a federal mandate for a vaccine, anytime that's been tried, it hasn't worked out. I'm old enough to remember a version of the swine flu in Gerald Ford's administration where they mandated a swine flu vaccine and the darn thing was not any good and it hurt people. So people have long memories, and the federal
Yeah.
vaccine mandate
Do
was
you
never going to work out, and the Biden administration was absolutely wrong to push that. And I think that drove some of the vaccine hesitancy
yeah.
even further that we see now.
Where do you see, I think, one thing that's interesting, as someone who watches this stuff, we have obviously a portion of folks who are reacting to, vaccine mandate, the Biden administration. But a lot of this Maha vaccine hesitancy appears to have feels like it's come from other origin points as well. And this feels like it's something in some ways this mix of new and old, and in terms of hesitancy and coming from some unusual quarters. I think you look at the kind of Trump Maha coalition and where that came from. It brought in some non-standard Republican voters, or people that the Republican Party hasn't always tried to go after or attracted. Has the shape of that, as you've watched this kind of since COVID evolve, has the shape and the makeup of that vaccine hesitancy, does it feel like it's changed from where you sit?
Well, it moved to center stage with the firing of all of the members of the Advisory Council for Immunization Practices at CDC. And we're seeing how that's playing out through the courts. They've now weighed in and said you couldn't do that. You didn't follow the Administrative Procedures Act. So we'll see where all of that ends up. But I will tell you this, and the reason I've written some about it is because, hey, fellow Republicans, you're going to have a tough time in these 2026 midterm elections. I mean, look, I was elected in a midterm cycle in Bush's first midterm. So I know it's possible for a president to hold on to a House majority through a midterm cycle, because I lived through that. But at the same time, if you do things where people are 80%, vaccine is an 80-20 issue. When you poll broadly, and this was done by, I think, President Trump's own pollster, Mr. Fabrizio, and found that 80% of people think vaccine protection from vaccine preventable diseases is important. So if you're going to start off completely discarding that, you got 80% of the people who are scratching their heads and saying, what the heck are you doing? So my advice to Republicans is be careful about this. And look, as a practicing physician, I was an OB-GYN, and the rubella vaccine completely, during my professional lifetime, completely eliminated congenital rubella, or for all practical purposes. And I mean, you still see one or two cases a year, but this was a real problem in the mid 1960s when the rubella vaccine first came along. I can remember as a medical student being in charge of caring for an infant with a congenital rubella syndrome in our very new neonatal intensive care unit. And these kids were sick and they were not going to get better. And it's entirely preventable. If their mothers don't catch rubella, then they don't have congenital rubella syndrome. So why would you do something that would convince people not to take an MMR? This is a real problem, and Republicans need to be careful about identifying with the group that says, "Hey, we don't want people to take vaccines." Again, you don't need a federal mandate for vaccines, but patient education is extremely important. From a physician, I get that. So part of that burden falls upon physicians to make their patients aware of it. But if a school district has a requirement for an MMR vaccine, this is a good thing for you, and you really ought to be using it.
I want to sort of ask about the politics. I think one of the issues, as I have thought about this, is a lot of this seemed sort of obvious in a way, in the sense that the support for vaccinations was existing even as sort of Kennedy was ascending as a political figure, and Maha was as well. Do you think that there has been sort of proper oversight in a Republican-controlled Congress with Kennedy in power that maybe could have alleviated to some degree the general political impact that may come in the midterms for the party as a whole? That could have, just curious how you think oversight has operated in this first year.
I think Senator Cassidy has done. I mean, that was one of his conditions when he voted to confirm the secretary, and I think he has done a good job of both in hearings and in conversations with people in the Department of HHS. So I think he has done a good job of furthering those concerns. But I think rather than having one person fighting that battle on their own, let's let's get people aware of what's happening. And so I think that was the power of some of the polling, and the reason I've written some of the things I've written. Now, listen, don't misunderstand me. I think some of the stuff that RFK Jr. has done has been phenomenal. I can remember years ago, Tom Coburn, who another doctor who was a senator, and I worked on trying to prevent, in a farm bill, for crying out loud, trying to prevent high fructose corn syrup from being subsidized. I mean, why are we paying for this stuff that is hurting people? And then on the other end, we're paying for their diabetes treatment. It made no sense. We didn't get very far with it back then. But at the same time, these are notions, these are concepts that I've been talking about for some time. I did a bill with Jim McGovern, who was kind of my nemesis on the Rules Committee, but we did a bill to ask medical schools to recommend to medical schools that they consider increasing the amount of time they spend on teaching nutrition. And again, this is now Secretary Kennedy is working in this space as well, and I welcome that. I think this is a good thing. What did I see the other day? You've got Dr. Oz, who's talking to hospitals about not feeding people such dreadful food in the hospital. We've all been in a hospital. We know how bad the food is. Now, granted, that's not what someone eats on a forever basis, but the notion is correct. If you want people to be healthy, you've got to feed them healthy food. The other thing is, I've been a big acolyte of Ken Cooper over the years, and Dr. Cooper, the sort of the father of modern aerobics. He's now in his 90s, but you hear him talk, and he said, if you will take people who are just at the worst possible physical aerobic shape and elevate them one level to really bad aerobic conditioning, you can eliminate, I don't remember how many billions of dollars of healthcare spending. And I think it's things like that where you actually can make modest adjustments in lifestyle and really see the payoff on the other end, which is why one of the bills that I really worked on before I left, I didn't get it across the finish line. It passed in the House, but Senator Grassley blocked it in the Senate, was a Preventive Health Savings Act. Give the CDC the tools to use the power of preventive health and extrapolate that into how they score, how they estimate the cost of a particular health policy. Because most preventive care, all of the expense is going to be in the first 10 years. The CDC has a 10-year budget window. So if you've got something that delivers way down the road, the CDC is going to look at that and say, oh, it's all cost. And of course, it can, under the budget neutrality requirements in Congress, it can never get done. But the Preventive Health Savings Act, I know other people are working on it this Congress. I hope they do end up getting something passed. But that would be an extremely powerful tool to put in the hands of the healthcare policy folks. Let's let the CBO have a longer time span than just 10 years to see how much something is going to cost the government.
Let me ask you, I mean, because I think what you're describing is something that I feel like I hear, a version of a lot when I talk to people who work in healthcare or just, regular voters. They look at the exercise stuff. They look at the, hey, we should have healthier foods with fewer. And I think there's a lot of agreement around that. I don't really hear people who disagree with that, who, work in healthcare, normal voters, what have you. And, at the same time, it almost feels like as a political issue, the vaccine stuff gets so heightened and the reactions to it are so strong that it overwhelms a lot of the stuff and sucks the air out of the room on things. When you think about, and when you've been writing about, the political risk to Republicans here, how much of that dynamic is at play where like the vaccine thing just blows up everything else, that might be going on, that might be easier to find common ground on?
Yeah, to some extent that is true, but at the same time, I mean, you can work on multiple things at the same time, which is one of the reasons I felt compelled to write some of the stuff I have. It's not to be critical of the Secretary of HHS. Goodness knows I was critical of the last Secretary of HHS. He was awful. He should never have been confirmed. But RFK Jr. is legitimately trying to improve the health of Americans. He's got a family history. I mean, his uncle, when he was president, I remember I was in middle school, and the president's health fitness regimen that he talked about. I mean, this is a longstanding area where they've had an interest. And here's from the national security perspective. When you hear Secretary Kennedy talk about what percentage of young people today are not fit to join the military, well, that's concerning. That is a national security issue. So it's exercise and diet. And again, I was a practicing physician for years. And how many people did I have come in to see me? Hey, doc, can you help with my hormones because I can't lose weight? Well, the way you lose weight is diet and exercise. I mean, I know I'm not one to talk. When you live on vending machines for 22 years, you're probably not the healthiest specimen on the table. But people know intuitively how to do these things. It's just they're hard. They take time. The results are slow to be achieved. But that's really the direction, and that's where the educational effort, I think, needs to be focused. Physical activity, aerobic activity. And at my age, I can't jog because my knees won't take it, but I can walk, and I should walk. And now, fortunately, my dog is in charge of that, and he has me walk twice a day.
Doctor, is on the topic of sort of biosecurity, I think one of the interesting elements is as the vaccines as a product have gotten more politicized, the interest in government financing them, especially at an early stage, seems to have also gotten more polarized as it sort of warps a little bit back into COVID and how COVID even began and discussions around that into a discussion of whether we are sort of funding our own demise through vaccines or through viral research, and we risk starting our own pandemics. And I think very well that BARDA, DARPA are some of the most important financing mechanisms for early stage vaccine makers. Are you concerned at all that Congress might abdicate some of those funding tranches so that some of the earlier stage companies that are working on intranasal or patch-based vaccines might have to shutter because all of a sudden the government isn't a reliable resource for them?
Yeah, it's certainly a risk. I mean, I worked years ago on the intranasal flu vaccine because I don't like needles. And I thought, well, it's great. I can get my flu vaccine by just taking a nose spray. And some of the results they had were very impressive as far as antibody production. But you're right. If you don't, it's like what's the old saying? No money, no mission. If you don't get proper attention in the federal budget now it's become even harder because Congress does not do the budget the way they are supposed to, and it gets worse and worse every year. And here, just a brief deviation. Certainly, the last years that I was in Congress, and obviously those were the Biden years, you couldn't get a telephone call answered from a cabinet secretary or assistant secretary because they have no need to talk to you. They're going to get their funding in an omnibus bill at the end of the year. That's the way it happens.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the way it's supposed to happen. They're supposed to get their funding in discrete appropriations bills. When I first got there, we did all 12 appropriations bills. Tom DeLay, who was the majority leader, told us during my very first term, he said, okay, we've gotten through the budget. Now we're going into appropriations. Get ready because we're going to be here 5 days a week. We're going to go late into the nights. Don't schedule things for the evening because we're going to have votes. And the appropriations bills were brought up under what's called an open rule. And that means any member can offer at any time an amendment to the bill that's under consideration. They just have to be there when that part of the bill is being read by the clerk and jump up and say, I've got an amendment at the desk, and they're recognized for 10 minutes on their amendment. And then it's voted on. And sometimes that can make some uncomfortable votes. We would have Ron Paul do 40 amendments on legalizing marijuana. We'd have Sheila Jackson Lee do 40 amendments on, I don't know, whatever thing affected her that month. So it was a labor intensive process, but I would argue that's a better process than what we've got now, which is 4 people deciding, Democrat and Republican leaders, House and Senate. So that's 4 people deciding the expenditures of the country for an entire fiscal year. That's why it's gotten so hard, because then, look, there's always a reason to vote against a spending bill. Spends too much, doesn't spend enough. You can always construct a logical argument for being a no on any of those. And the problem is it becomes harder and harder to get the votes you need to pass something. And now, of course, the filibuster over in the Senate has become an almost impossible impediment to getting any sort of funding bills passed. And we're seeing that right now with Department of Homeland Security and the long lines of the TSA. It's wrong. Congress shouldn't treat its constituents that way. It's just, I don't care what party you're in. It's just phenomenally wrong. And then to go, I'm going to sound like everybody else, to go on vacation while you have federal employees who aren't getting paid. And it's not just TSA. It's people in CISA. It's people in other branches of Homeland Security that are not getting paid. This is a problem. Hats off to President Trump for recognizing the problem with the TSA lines and doing an executive order. He's going to be challenged in court, but would you want to be the lawyer that argues that TSA agents shouldn't be paid? I mean, that's a terrible political position to have to take. So Trump, very wisely, I think, signed that executive order. Contrast that to President Obama, who closed the World War II memorial when there was a government funding lapse, an appropriation lapse. I mean, how crazy was that? It didn't cost anything to stay open. He just did it for meanness. So you got President Trump who's trying to solve a problem, and I think I'm grateful for that.
Let me steer you back, real. We only have a few seconds left here. I wanted to ask you, when you look at health, we've got the midterms coming up in, sooner than we think, a few months away, essentially. When you look at healthcare policy issues out there, whether it be drug pricing, something else, what do you think the best message that Republicans have on, the what should be, if you have to pick one thing to talk about, what should Republicans be focused on heading into the midterms on healthcare policy? Is it drug pricing?
Well, drug pricing is certainly something that's extremely important, and politically it's very popular. And this is not new. Again, I've done hearings on this when I was chairman of the Health Subcommittee. So I think that, and if that's one of the places where I would recommend to the Secretary of HHS that, maybe concentrate more on drug pricing and some of your changes to the food pyramid than talking about what some trial lawyer wants you to do on vaccine availability. It would just be my advice.
Yeah. Well, I hate that we have to end it here, but I do very much appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. That is all the time that we do have for today. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. We will be following these topics closely as always, and you can keep up with our coverage on endpoints.news and by subscribing to our newsletters. Conversation here will live on YouTube. The audio will be up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you're already signed up for our post hoc newsletter, you'll get notifications next time we have a show coming up. If you're not, hop over to endpointsnews.com and you can subscribe to follow us. You can also follow us on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast, and Blue Sky by searching Endpoints News. A huge thank you to our producer, Nicole Wetzman, and our engineer, Dalen Turk, for making the show possible. Max, thank you for joining us. I will see you back in the newsroom, and I will see all of you the next time news breaks. For Post Hoc Live, I am Drew Armstrong, executive editor at Endpoints News.